Sadly, the 20th century saw many a murderous doctor, but one of the first seemed, on the surface, one of the least likely. Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen was said to be quiet, mild-mannered and meek. Yet this didn't stop him from brutally murdering his wife and burying her remains beneath his cellar. Though some now question whether he actually did either. In today's episode of Well I Never, the story of Dr. Crippen, one of the most notorious killers in British history, but whose guilt is now being questioned by many. Born on September 11, 1862 in the city of Coldwater in Michigan, the young Hawley Harvey Crippen was known for his meek and mild-mannered nature. Later, he would develop an interest in medicine, more specifically homeopathy, the popularity of this alternative therapy growing massively at the time. He enrolled at the University of Michigan Homeopathic Medical School, but transferred to the Cleveland Homeopathic Medical College shortly afterward. It was from here that he graduated in 1884, which was also around the same time that he met his first wife, Charlotte. They went on to have a child together, a son, whom they named Hawley Otto. Unfortunately for the growing family, Charlotte suffered a stroke and died in 1892, leaving her young son motherless. While Dr. Crippen did his best to care for Otto's needs, he was unable to balance his homeopathic career with the energetic toddler. Admitting defeat, he travelled to California to entrust his 2-year-old son to his parents. He then continued to New York City to establish his own homeopathic practice and started working for Dr. Munyon, a homeopathic pharmaceutical company. It was while in New York that he met a woman named Corinne Cora Turner, the daughter of a Russian-Polish immigrant and his German wife. From the get-go, it was clear that Cora and Crippen's personalities were very different. While Dr. Crippen was quiet, gentle and reserved, Cora was incredibly assertive and extravagant, both of which were traits that made her come across as overbearing and intimidating. Despite this mismatch, the two married and moved to London in 1897, where Dr. Crippen set up as a distributor for Dr. Munyon's due to his US medical qualifications being insufficient to allow him to practice in the UK. While he was busy with that, Cora was trying her hardest to become one of the city's most respected opera singers. She failed miserably in this endeavour though, and began working at a music hall instead, where she performed under the stage name of Belle Elmore. Her constant exposure to the public led to Cora involving herself in a string of romantic and sexual affairs with several enraptured fans. Dr. Crippen was also far from faithful. Having been sacked by Dr. Munyon's for spending too much time trying to manage his wife's career, he became manager of Druitt's Institution for the Deaf, where he hired one Ethel Le Neve as a typist, and soon the pair were having an affair of their own. In September of 1905, Dr. Crippen and Cora moved to 39 Hilldrop Crescent, Camden Road in Holloway, a district of London. There, they slept in separate bedrooms, which served to further deteriorate their already tenuous marriage. This didn't bother Dr. Crippen one bit though. By then, he had already fallen head over heels in love with Ethel, but their relationship was hampered by the fact that he was unable to divorce his wife. And so, he continued the relationship with his mistress, all the while living with Cora under the same roof. This strange situation continued until 1910, the year when many claim Dr. Crippen had finally had enough. On January 31st, 1910, the Crippens held a dinner party for Paul and Clara Martinetti, who were close friends of Cora. The evening passed pleasantly enough. However, the Martinellis later alleged that Cora had loudly and savagely berated her husband for failing to escort Paul to the bathroom. They already be doing that. Mr. Marionetti going, I can go myself. You can go yourself. Take him. He can go himself. I can go myself. The evening passed pleasantly enough. However, the Marionettis later alleged that Cora had loudly and savagely berated her husband An overgrown man in the toilet. Sorry. I will get past it. On January 31st, 1910, the Crippens held a dinner party for Paul and Clara Martinetti, who were close friends of Cora. The evening passed pleasantly enough. However, the Martinellis later alleged that Cora had loudly and savagely berated her husband for failing to escort Paul to the bathroom. The dinner party ended in the small hours of February the 1st, and this would be the last time that Cora Crippen was seen alive. Because of her job as a stage performer, Cora's absence was soon noticed by her circle of friends. Many of them began asking after her, confused at why she had suddenly vanished from London. At first, their concerns were soothed by Dr. Crippen's claims that she had merely returned to the United States. But as weeks passed, this excuse no longer felt like the truth. Her disappearance seemed even more bizarre when Dr. Crippen began to say that she had passed away after suddenly contracting an illness back in her home country. As plausible as this may have sounded to some, something about it just didn't sit right with others. Their suspicions were raised even more when Dr. Crippen's mistress, Ethel, began to wear Cora's jewellery in public. By the end of February, she had moved into the couple's home at Hildrop Crescent, which many found questionable. The unbelievable alleged circumstance of Cora's disappearance and eventual death, as well as the way the lovers were cavorting around in public, proved to be too much. The authorities were first alerted by Cora's friend, strong woman Kate Williams, who also went by the name Vulcana. Initially, the case wasn't given much mind, but when more of Cora's performer friends began to come forward, the police started to take action. On July 8th, a couple of months after Cora was last seen by the Martinettis, Dr. Crippen was visited by Chief Inspector Walter Dew, who proceeded to interview him about his wife's disappearance. The story that he told, however, was much different from the explanations he had given to their social circle. He told Dew that Cora had left him for another man by the name of Bruce Miller, an American she had met several years prior. Dew informed him that it would be better if Cora contacted him to confirm this story, and Crippen replied, stating that he would place advertisements in newspapers in an effort to have her make contact. But he never did. Instead, he and Le Neve set off the next day and travelled to Brussels, continuing on to Antwerp, where they boarded the SS Montrose, which was bound for Canada. Knowing that they were the prime suspects in Cora's disappearance, the lovers decided to don disguises. Dr. Crippen shaved his distinctive moustache while Ethel disguised herself as a boy. Together, they travelled as father and son. Back in London, the authorities were busy searching the home at number 39 Hildrop Crescent after it was found that its residents were missing. During the investigation, Chief Inspector Dew discovered that there were loose bricks in the floor of the cellar and ordered his officers to dig these up. Nothing could have prepared them for the gruesome sight that lay underneath, because what they unearthed were the remains of a female body. It was severely decomposed and consisted of nothing but pieces of flesh, however. It clearly lacked its head, limbs and skeleton. An autopsy determined that the remains belonged to Cora Crippen, whom her husband claimed had returned to the United States in February. The medical examiner also ruled that the doctor's unfortunate wife had been poisoned before being dismembered and buried underneath the cellar floor. Meanwhile, Dr. Crippen and Ethel had attracted suspicion while on board the SS Montrose. Their co-passengers found them strangely affectionate, exhibiting a bond that didn't seem to be one shared between a father and a son. More than that, though, the boys' clothes appeared ill-fitting, and this, along with their behaviour, was enough for some people to sound the alarm. After growing suspicious himself, Captain Kendall sent a telegram to Scotland Yard, which was received by Chief Inspector Dew, who didn't waste any time. He and several officers boarded the SS Laurentic, which was capable of travelling at much higher speeds than the SS Montrose. Because of this, the father and son duo were arrested on July 31st, as the ship that they were on was sailing up St. Lawrence. They were identified as Dr. Crippen and his mistress, both of whom were swiftly handcuffed and escorted back to London for their trial. To quote the history press, it was decided that the pair should not be tried together. Crippen would face his trial first, and once that verdict had been determined, Ethel Le Neve would take her turn in the dock to be tried as an accessory. So it was that on October 18th, Crippen stood alone in the dock at the Old Bailey before the Lord Chief Justice of England, Lord Alveston. The defence team argued that the body found in the cellar of Dr. Crippen's home was not his wife, but rather an unknown woman who had been placed there before the couple had moved in. In response, the prosecution proved that the remains were, in fact, Cora's. They pointed out that one of the pieces of flesh that had been recovered bore a scar that Cora had on her lower abdomen. To add to that, a pajama jacket that had been wrapped around the body was made of a particular cloth and pattern that was only developed in late 1908, which proved that the remains were buried there after the Crippens had moved in. But the most damning piece of evidence was that the body contained traces of a poison called hyoscine, which Dr. Crippen had purchased on January 17th, just a few weeks before his wife was last seen alive. With all these presented before them, the jury only took 30 minutes to convict Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen of the murder of his wife Cora, and he was sentenced to death. Ethel Le Neve was also put on trial a few days later on October 25th. However, she was ultimately found not guilty of accessory to murder. Her acquittal meant that 48-year-old Dr. Crippen was alone when he faced the gallows on November 23rd. He was buried in an unmarked grave with a photograph of his beloved mistress, along with several of her letters. At first glance, the murder case of Cora Crippen seems clear-cut. Not only was there a body and pieces of evidence, but there was a motive as well. Her husband, dissatisfied with their marriage and wanting to start a new life with his mistress, had poisoned her. He had the means to obtain the poison too. As a medical practitioner, his purchase of a toxic substance would not have been questioned. However, many claim that the story isn't as unambiguous as history has made us believe all these years. For instance, Professor David Foran, the Director of Forensic Science at Michigan State University, claims that DNA samples obtained from Cora Crippen's grandnieces bore no match to the remains found in the cellar. More than that, though, they determined that the body wasn't even a woman. According to renowned toxicologist John Trestrell, quote, "This is the slide which Spilsbury used to identify the body as Cora Crippen's, and this was the evidence on which Crippen was convicted." But the substance in the slide is not Cora Crippen. No question. I don't say Hawley Crippen is innocent, but he is no longer proven guilty. Foran and Trestrell's findings, though, have been disputed by several experts. Despite a large number of detractors, attempts to clear Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen's name continue. Only time will tell if they'll succeed. As for Le Neve, she spent time in the United States and settled in Canada for a while before returning to the UK, where she died in 1967. In the 1980s, Sir Hugh Rees-Rankin claimed to have met Ethel Le Neve many years prior and states that she informed him that Crippen had committed the murder because Cora had syphilis. So, what do you think happened? Did Crippen murder his wife? Or if he didn't, whose were the remains that were found, and where did Cora Turner go? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more, make sure to like and subscribe. Right then, until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.